Have you ever wondered what silent stones might reveal if they could speak? Welcome to Unearthed Secrets, where impossible shapes rise from deserts, forests, mountains, and forgotten plains. Before we begin, please like, subscribe, and share where in the world you're watching from. The finger that pointed at nothing. Far out on a windswept plateau in New Zealand's southern highlands, there is a stretch of land where the earth rises just enough to meet the sky, and where the clouds drift so low they seem close enough to touch. It is a place where the wind carries the scent of cold stone, where grasses bend in unison as though listening for something, and where the light changes with a subtlety that feels almost otherworldly. Travelers rarely come here, not because the land is inhospitable, but because it feels unfinished, like a sketch drawn loosely in broad, pale strokes by the hand of nature, waiting for details that were never added. In the center of that plateau stands a single, narrow pillar of stone. It is long, slender, and unmistakably pointing upward, toward nothing, toward the empty sky. It rises from the land like a lone finger lifted in silence. Its shape is too striking to ignore, too strange to belong to randomness alone. And yet, by all geological accounts, it is natural, the remnant of a once buried stone spine exposed by centuries of erosion. Locals call it the finger that pointed at nothing. To reach it, you walk across rolling fields dotted with small stones, the remains of an ancient volcanic landscape. The ground beneath your feet feels firm but quiet, as if the earth itself is listening. The wind moves constantly, never still, never too harsh, but always present, brushing your clothes and hair as though passing through you rather than around you. As you approach the pillar, its shape becomes clearer. It is thin, no more than a meter wide at the base, and rises nearly 5 meters into the air. Time has worn its edges smooth. Lichen crawls up its lower half in patches of pale green and silver. The top of the stone narrows to a rounded point that seems almost precise, as though shaped deliberately. When you finally stand beneath it, the pillar feels impossibly balanced. It leans just slightly, so slightly you might not notice unless you circle it, tilting toward the southern sky. It points upward, unfaltering, toward a region of the heavens with no particular star, no particular landmark, nothing that gives reason for direction. It points to emptiness. It points to sky. It points to silence. Some say it once marked a pathway used by early Maori travelers. Others believe it was a naturally formed guidepost, an anchor point in a landscape where orientation can easily be lost under cloud and mist. A few claim the stone once aligned with seasonal stars, though no astronomical evidence supports this. What is certain is that the pillar feels purposeful, like a question asked long ago with no one left to answer it. Older generations of people living in the nearest settlement recall stories passed down quietly, mentioning the stone as a boundary marker between realms. They say it points to where the sky begins, a poetic phrase that offers no solid explanation but conveys a sense of meaning lost over centuries. One elder, when asked about the stone, simply said, "It points to what we cannot see." Another called it a reminder of a promise broken, though she would never elaborate on what kind of promise or who had broken it. These stories, half spoken and half remembered, add a veil of mystery to the pillar, as though it has been guarding a secret the land long ago chose to forget. Scientists who have studied it describe the stone as a tor, a remnant of harder volcanic material left standing while softer stone eroded away. The explanation makes sense geologically, clean and simple. Yet even scientists admit the formation is unusually slender, unusually straight, unusually poised, qualities difficult to explain through erosion alone. One geologist wrote in her notes, "It looks as though it was meant to point." The pillar changes character with the seasons. In winter, frost clings to its surface in delicate feathers. Ice crystals line its edges, sparkling faintly in the pale sunlight. Winds whip across the plateau, carrying fine grains of snow that swirl around the stone without ever seeming to settle on its tip. It stands cold and quiet, its shadow short and sharp against the white ground. In summer, when the plateau is alive with tall grasses and clear skies, the stone casts a long shadow across the land. Birds occasionally land on nearby rocks, but never on the pillar itself. The wind is warm then, the sky brighter, and the stone looks almost golden at sunrise. But in autumn, especially late autumn, the pillar takes on a strange stillness. The grasses turn bronze and brittle, the air grows cool, the wind slows, and the pillar feels as though it is holding its breath. Travelers who approach it during this season often describe feeling as though they have interrupted something. One hiker, after spending an afternoon near the stone, wrote, "It felt like standing in the middle of a conversation I was not supposed to hear." She could not explain what she meant, only that the land felt aware. The finger that pointed at nothing may stand alone, but it is not lonely in the way landmarks usually are. It feels like something waiting, something watching, something holding a place for someone, or something that never arrived. In fog, which drifts frequently over the plateau, the stone becomes eerie. Its silhouette appears and disappears as clouds of mist move across the land. At times it seems closer than it should be, at others farther away. Some have said that during thick fog the pillar looks like a tall figure standing with an outstretched arm, pointing upward. One shepherd swore he once heard a faint hum near the stone during a morning fog. He described it as a vibration, not a sound, like something resonating faintly through the ground. When he returned the next day, the stone was silent. He never walked near it again. Another traveler, an artist visiting from abroad, spent several hours sketching the pillar from different angles. She said that every time she turned her back to adjust her canvas, she felt as though the stone had subtly shifted. She didn't mean moved, not literally. She meant its presence changed, its mood changed, its silence changed. Her sketches, later displayed in a small gallery, show the pillar in countless moods: solemn, watchful, peaceful, stern. Each drawing looks like a different representation of the same object, as though the stone held multiple personalities depending on the light and the viewer's angle. Locals who have seen these sketches say, quietly, "That is how it is. It looks different every time." No one knows who first named it the finger that pointed at nothing. The name appears in old notebooks, in half-remembered letters, in stories told by shepherds and farmers who lived generations before. One story says that long ago, before the first people settled the valley, the stone pointed toward a star that guided travelers, but the star shifted over centuries, and the stone's purpose was lost. Another story says the stone once pointed toward a mountain peak that collapsed in an earthquake, leaving nothing for it to reference anymore. Yet another says the stone was placed by someone waiting for a companion who promised to return from the east, and that the finger points toward the sky because the companion never came. The details vary, but one theme remains constant. The stone points to absence, to loss, to something missing. There are marks at the base of the stone, small, shallow indentations carved by wind and time. They could be natural. They could be remnants of something once tied to the stone. They could be meaningless patterns created by erosion, or they could be signs of waiting, scratches left by people who stood here long ago, scratching into the ground while they looked toward the horizon, hoping for a figure to appear. The land around the pillar is unusually flat, a strange quirk in a region known for rugged hills and shifting elevations. It feels like a stage, like a place meant for observation, like a place chosen by someone who wanted a clear view of the sky. In twilight, when the sky turns rose and lavender, the stone's shadow stretches across the plateau like an outstretched path. Some visitors have followed this shadow instinctively, only to realize they are walking toward emptiness, toward open land, toward nothing. The stone does not lead anywhere. It does not point to anything, and yet it feels like it does. One mountaineer spent a night camping near the pillar. He said he fell asleep easily but awoke at 3 a.m. to a stillness so profound it felt unnatural. The wind had stopped entirely. The clouds above were motionless. The land was silent. He stepped outside his tent and looked up at the pillar. He said it seemed taller than before. Impossibly so. He said the stars behind it felt closer. Too close. He said the stone looked like a silhouette pointing not at the sky, but at him. When the wind returned, he packed his belongings and left before dawn. Others have described similar feelings, of being seen, but not in a threatening way. Seen in the way a monument sees. Seen in the way a silent witness sees. Some visitors leave small offerings at the base of the stone. Pebbles, feathers, branches, flowers. They say it feels appropriate, though they do not know why. They say the stone feels like something that was once sacred, though no record exists of ceremonies here. They say the stone feels incomplete, as though awaiting a final gesture, a final visitor, a final message. Yet no message comes, no footsteps arrive, no prophecy is fulfilled. The stone simply stands, pointing upward, as it always has. In dawn light, the stone glows faintly. Its surface reflects the first rays of the sun with a softness that feels almost warm. In the heat of midday, it casts a thin shadow that trembles slightly in the wind. At night, under a sky full of stars, the stone becomes a dark outline, an upward motion frozen in time. Standing beneath it then, you feel the weight of the sky pressing down, endless and empty, vast beyond comprehension. You feel how small the stone is against the universe, and yet you also feel how deeply it anchors the human imagination, how easily it transforms emptiness into mystery, nothingness into meaning. For what is a finger pointing to the sky, if not a question? What is an unanswered question, if not a story? And what is a story without an ending, if not a waiting place? The finger that pointed at nothing has stood through centuries of storms. It has stood through earthquakes, lightning strikes, droughts, migrations, forgotten settlements, lost footsteps. It has stood through nights when clouds hid the stars completely, and days when the sun burned the land into shimmering silver. It has never fallen. It has never shifted. It has never stopped pointing upward. The stone does not demand interpretation. It does not seek attention. It does not offer answers. It simply stands, silent, steadfast, enduring, pointing at nothing that humans can see, and everything they cannot. When you finally leave the plateau, walking down the gentle slope toward lower land where shrubs and trees grow again, you might look back one last time. You will see the pillar rising alone against the sky, thin and unyielding, a gesture carved by time. You will see the wind move the grass around it. You will see the sky behind it stretching endlessly into brightness or dusk. And you might feel, quietly and inexplicably, that the stone is still waiting, waiting for someone who was supposed to return, waiting for something that never arrived, waiting for answers no one alive remembers how to ask. The finger that pointed at nothing will remain where it stands, through wind, through silence, through centuries, pointing at the sky, pointing at absence, pointing at the unfinished edges of human wonder. The horn of the lost herds. Across the vast Mongolian steppe, where the horizon forms an unbroken ring of sky around the earth, there is a silence so immense that it feels ancient, as if it predates all memory. The land here stretches outward in every direction, miles of rolling grassland shifting in patterns set by the wind, dotted by clusters of wildflowers, low shrubs, and the occasional distant herd of horses moving like a single, breathing organism. Nomadic families travel these plains as they have for centuries, their routes shaped by seasons, herds, and weather. Gurs appear and disappear with the passing months. Trails vanish under new grass. The landscape resets itself constantly, as though trying to erase all signs of human presence. But there is one object the land has never erased. A single, curved stone rising from the earth, like a horn breaking through the surface of the steppe. It stands at an odd angle, leaning slightly northward, its point curving upward as though listening to the wind. Dark against the pale grasses and long shadows, it resembles the great horn of some unheard-of beast, an animal too old to exist anymore, or perhaps one that never existed at all. Locals call it the horn of the lost herds. It rises just over a meter high, though its length suggests much more lies buried beneath the soil, something ancient lodged deep within the earth. The surface of the stone is smooth in some areas, pitted in others. It curves with uncanny symmetry, as though shaped intentionally. The color is a deep, weathered gray that looks almost black at dusk, and faint bands of mineral strata run along its length like the grain of bone. To reach it, you must ride or walk across an expanse of land with no markers, no roads, no clear paths. The world around you is a near-perfect circle of blue above and gold below, a gentle ocean of grass stirred constantly by the wind. Even the sound here feels different, soft, muted, as though the air itself has grown thick with age. When you approach the horn, it does not stand out until you are nearly upon it. The grass hides it until the last moment, revealing only the slightest curve of dark stone, and then it appears fully, a long, sweeping arc of mineral rising from the ground, unmistakable, undeniable, out of place, and yet perfectly suited to the emptiness around it. No one knows how long it has stood here. No one knows how much of it lies underground. No one knows why it points exactly toward the northern hills. It simply exists, as though it has always existed. Some say the horn was once part of a larger formation, a stone ridge shaped by weather until only this curved fragment remained. Others insist it was carved by ancient hands, though no tool marks can be found. A few believe it is a remnant of a long-lost ritual site used by steppe tribes whose cultures vanished before writing reached this part of the world. But the most enduring story is older still. It says that the horn marks the place where a legendary herd vanished. According to this tale, told quietly around fires, told half as legend and half as memory, there was once a vast herd of wild horses so large that their movement shook the earth. They roamed the steppe at the dawn of human time, appearing and disappearing like clouds rolling across the horizon. Their coats were said to shine like moonlight, their manes streaming behind them like banners in the sky. One day, the herd vanished entirely. Some say they rode into a storm that swallowed them. Some say they galloped into the distant mountains and never returned. Others say they simply dissolved into the wind. And where they vanished, the ground cracked open and left behind a single stone horn, curved like the horns of the old wild gods, pointing toward the path they took. The truth does not matter much in stories like this. What matters is the feeling the horn gives when you stand beside it. It feels like a memory. It feels like a signal. It feels like a mark left for someone who has not yet arrived. When the wind blows across the steppe, and it always does, it makes a hollow, faintly musical sound as it moves around the horn. The tone is soft and low, almost like a distant animal call. Some travelers swear they hear the sound shift as they move around the stone. Others say the horn sings louder during certain seasons, especially just before winter, when the winds are sharp and the air trembles with cold. A herder once claimed that during a blizzard he heard the horn emit a deep bellowing tone, like the roar of an enormous creature calling across the world. He believed it was the voice of the lost herd. When he returned in spring and the grass grew tall again, the horn was silent. Another traveler, a young woman riding alone across the steppe, said she fell asleep near the stone during a warm summer afternoon. She dreamt of horses surrounding her, hundreds of them. Yet when she awoke, the land was silent. Only the stone remained, pointing toward the northern horizon like a guidepost. A geologist studying the stone once placed his hand on its surface and reported feeling a vibration, faint, almost imperceptible, like the reverberation of sound through rock. His instruments detected nothing unusual. When he tried again the next day, the vibration was gone. Nomadic families do not touch the horn unless necessary, not out of fear, but out of respect. They say it belongs to the land, not to people. They say it marks a boundary between the herds of the earth and the herds of the sky, an idea that makes sense only in the language of tradition, not in the language of science. During sunrise, the horn casts a long shadow that stretches across the steppe like an extended arm. The shadow seems to point toward distant hills, where the land folds upward like sleeping bodies under blankets of grass. During sunset, the horn glows softly as the last light catches its surface, and the shadow points behind it, toward the open plain where the wind gathers speed before nightfall. In winter, when snow blankets the steppe, the horn rises dark and solitary from a world of white. Snow drifts gather at its base, forming smooth curves that make it appear taller. Sometimes the upper half becomes sheathed in ice, and for a brief moment at dawn, the horn shines like polished bone. In spring, when grass shoots upward in bright green clusters, the horn seems to sink slightly back into the land. Birds perch nearby, but never directly on the stone. Foals born in the herds refuse to graze too close to it, skirting a wide circle around the formation, as though sensing something older in the earth. In late summer, when the steppe shimmers with heat, The horn's silhouette wavers slightly in the air, each ripple of wind distorting its shape until it looks like something breathing. In autumn, the horn appears darker, more severe, more solitary, as though preparing for the long winter silence. What lies beneath it is anyone's guess. Some believe the horn is only the visible part of a much larger structure, buried deep underground, perhaps a spine or rib of some ancient creature turned to stone through centuries of mineral seepage. Others believe it is a natural volcanic remnant, though the shape remains too perfect, too curved, too reminiscent of intention. In the 1990s, a team of archaeologists conducted a small excavation near the stone, digging a trench several meters away. They found nothing. No bones, no artifacts, no signs of human presence. The earth was clean, untouched, empty, as though the stone had always stood alone. One researcher suggested using ground-penetrating radar to scan the soil beneath the horn. The elders refused, not angrily, but firmly. They said the stone was not to be disturbed. When asked why, one elder replied, "Because it is waiting." He would not say for whom. The horn's angle is precise, leaning slightly northward, but not enough to be unstable. It has weathered storms that toppled trees miles away, endured earthquakes that split nearby hillsides, survived centuries of erosion with little change in its posture. It stands like something making a declaration, or like something listening for an answer. During certain nights, especially when the sky is cloudless and the stars resemble scattered silver dust across the heavens, the horn appears to align with constellations that shift slowly with the seasons. Never perfectly, never in a way that suggests calendar function, but in a manner that feels like a gesture toward the sky. Travelers camping near the stone sometimes claim they hear hoofbeats at night, soft, distant, rhythmic. When they step outside their tents, the land is quiet. The only movement is the grass rippling in the wind. Some believe those hoofbeats belong to the lost herd returning briefly in spirit. Others think the wind merely echoes strangely around the stone. A few believe that the stone carries sound through the ground in ways human ears cannot fully understand. Wooden poles have once been placed near the stone by earlier generations, markers used by herders to orient themselves in the vastness of the steppe. Over time, these poles rotted or were carried away by storms. The horn remained. Even the smell of the land changes near the stone, slightly cooler, slightly sharper, as though the earth exhales differently around it. In the deep of night, when the steppe becomes a vast shadow stretching under the glow of distant stars, the horn looks almost fluid, as though its shape bends with the darkness. Its curve becomes more pronounced. Its tip seems to reach higher toward the sky. Standing beside it then, you might feel the world around you widen, as though the steppe opens like a vast, undisturbed ocean. You might feel, too, that the stone remembers every hoof that ever crossed this land, every thunderous surge of horses galloping across the grass, every migration of antelope, every movement of wind-carved creatures that once roamed the plains. The horn of the lost herds holds all of it in its silence, and yet it waits. For what? For whom? For which echo? No one knows. When you finally walk away, leaving the horn behind as the horizon slowly swallows it, you might feel its presence lingering, like a low, distant sound fading into the wind. You might feel that something in the land has always been listening, always watching, always waiting. The horn stands precisely where it has always stood, pointing toward the northern hills, pointing toward the path no herd has followed in centuries, pointing toward the silence of the open sky. It will remain there, through storms, through centuries, through all the migrations of the living and the passing of the lost. A stone horn raised in the grasslands, holding a memory the world has forgotten, waiting for footsteps that may never return, listening to winds that carry old echoes across the endless steppe. The stair that climbed no mountain, high in the Peruvian Andes, where the clouds drift low enough to brush the hills, and the air grows thin with memory, there is a ridge of broken stone that looks, at first glance, no different from any other. The mountains here rise in layers, blue on the horizon, gray in the distance, green where terraces still cling to slopes shaped by ancient hands. Llamas graze along narrow paths, The wind moves in soft, persistent currents, and time stretches thin across peaks that have witnessed civilizations rise and vanish like shifting clouds. But on one of these ridges, far from the well-known ruins, far from marked trails, far from the footsteps of tourists, lies a formation that does not quite belong to the mountain, though it is made of the same stone. 3 slabs arranged so precisely, so intentionally, so quietly that they resemble steps. A stair that climbs toward nothing, a stair that meets no summit, a stair that leads upward, then stops. Locals call it the stair that climbed no mountain. From a distance, it looks like 3 wide, flat stones laid end to end at a gentle incline, as though forming the first part of a staircase that once continued upward before the mountain swallowed it. The slabs are perfectly aligned, the edges smooth enough to suggest shaping, yet weathered enough to seem ancient beyond record. Each slab is nearly identical in length and height, forming an ascent so subtle it feels like an invitation. And above the 3 steps, nothing. Only empty air, only sky, only a slope of natural earth untouched by human hands. To reach the slabs, you must follow a narrow path that winds through terraces abandoned long before the arrival of the Inca. The terrace's stones sit half-collapsed, reclaimed by grass and small shrubs. Birds call from the low cliffs. The wind carries the scent of cold stone and distant rain, and the mountains, always the mountains, rise around you like silent witnesses. When you first see the slabs, it is easy to miss them. They blend with the land, partially buried by centuries of soil and weather. But as you draw closer, the straight lines reveal themselves. The flat surfaces appear. The precise angles become unmistakable. They are not natural, not accidental, not placed by chance. And yet, no one knows who placed them, or why they were left unfinished. Some say the slabs were once part of a ceremonial approach, an ancient processional path leading to a shrine or a viewpoint long since eroded. Others claim they were part of a measurement system used by early cultures to track the sun or the stars. A few insist the slabs once connected to a larger structure, now collapsed or buried by rock slides, that led higher into the hills. But the most enduring explanation, carried softly in the words of shepherds who move their animals along these slopes, is that the slabs were never meant to lead to anything physical. They point upward, one elderly herder said, because whoever made them knew the mountain above was not the mountain they cared about. He left the rest of the meaning unstated, as though the rest belonged to silence. The slabs are carved from a type of granite found nowhere else in the immediate vicinity. The stone is pale with faint veins of quartz that catch the sun at certain angles. When the morning light touches the steps, they shimmer faintly, as though reflecting water, though they are completely dry. Each slab is smooth on top, but the sides bear marks, lines, grooves, shallow indentations. Some appear carved, others are fractures caused by centuries of expansion and contraction under changing temperatures. Archaeologists debate which marks are human and which are not. One thing is uncontested: their alignment is too perfect to be natural. The incline is precise, the spacing is intentional, the direction is deliberate. The stair ascends toward a particular point on the horizon, a notch between 2 distant peaks that aligns with the rising sun on the winter solstice. Yet the slabs are not part of any known astronomical complex. They sit alone, without accompanying structures, without the terraces or platforms or walls that characterize ceremonial sites of the region. Just 3 steps, 3 slabs, a beginning with no continuation, a path with no destination. Some visitors describe a strange feeling when they stand before the steps, an indescribable sense that something is missing, not physically missing, but conceptually missing, as though the steps were built to lead somewhere that once existed not on the land, but in the minds or beliefs of the builders. One traveler, a mountaineer accustomed to high altitudes and silence, said the slabs felt like the first 3 notes of a song that never resolves. Another said the air around them felt slightly heavier, slightly colder, as though the slabs marked a boundary between something known and something forgotten. Shepherds walking past the slabs at dawn sometimes stop and rest on the lowest step. They say the stone warms faster than the surrounding earth. They say animals avoid standing on the steps themselves, but will graze peacefully around them. They say the slabs remember feet, even though no one alive has ever used them as steps. In fog, the slabs look almost ghostly, three pale surfaces rising from nothing toward nothing. The mist curls around them, obscuring the upper half of the ridge. If you stand on the top slab during such fog, you feel as though you are suspended between worlds, stepping upward into a void. During sunset, the slabs cast long, angular shadows across the ground, forming a geometric pattern that looks older than writing. Travelers have taken photographs of these shadows, noting how the pattern seems to shift subtly with the angle of the sun, despite the stones themselves never moving. In winter, frost collects on the slabs in thin layers that resemble carvings, lines and swirling patterns that melt away in the first morning light. Some swear these frost patterns resemble symbols. Others see only random formations created by the cold night's breath. But the strongest stories come from the rainy season. During heavy rains, water runs down the upper slopes and flows over the slabs in thin sheets. In these moments, the steps look almost like a waterfall made of stone. The water glistens across the surfaces, creating the illusion of movement. Some say the slabs appear to glow during storms, their quartz veins catching flashes of lightning and scattering the light in brief pulses. One shepherd, now long buried in a hillside cemetery, once said that during a storm in his youth, he saw someone climbing the steps, a figure dressed in white, barely visible in the rain, ascending the three slabs before stepping into the air above the last one and disappearing. When asked if he believed the figure was real, he only shook his head and replied, "Real is not the right question." In the 1960s, an archaeological team conducted a small excavation near the slabs. They hoped to find post holes or foundation stones indicating a larger structure. They found nothing. No ceramics, no bone fragments, no tools, no evidence of human habitation. It was as though the slabs had been placed there without any supporting activity. Three pieces of stone in the middle of a landscape, otherwise untouched. One researcher proposed that the slabs represented an unfinished building project, perhaps abandoned due to war or famine or migration. But the precision of the slabs contradicted this idea. Unfinished structures tend to look rough. These steps look complete, but leading nowhere. A historian examining regional legends found references to the steps of the sky, a phrase mentioned in several pre-Inca oral traditions. These stories describe a place where wise people ascended toward the light beyond the peaks, or where messengers of the gods were said to arrive on the breath of dawn. She could not confirm that these stories referred to the slabs, but the similarities lingered in her mind. The stair that climbed no mountain may have been meant to climb something that is not a mountain at all. Some believe the slabs were a symbolic gesture, an ascent into the spiritual world, represented physically by the first few steps. Others believe they were a marker, signaling the direction in which important people were buried under the earth. A few think they were part of a ritual of passage, where individuals ascended the steps at key moments in their lives. But most who visit the slabs feel a quiet ache, a sensation of potential cut short, a beginning without a continuation, a story with its ending missing. When you stand on the first step, the ground feels firm. When you stand on the second, the air changes slightly. When you stand on the third, the horizon opens in a way that feels intentional. Above you lies only the sky. Behind you lies only the path you walked. Beneath you lies only the memory of ancient hands. Some claim that if you stand on the top slab with your eyes closed, you can hear faint whispers in the wind, voices speaking languages too old to recognize. Others say they feel nothing at all, except the weightless quiet of high altitude. Still others say the steps seem to vibrate slightly underfoot, especially at dawn, as though the earth is shifting just beneath them. The slab's alignment is not perfect due north or due east. Instead, it points toward the rising sun at the winter solstice, a moment when the light touches the top slab first, then the second, then the third, descending backward down the stair as though reversing its ascent. This strange inversion has puzzled researchers for decades. Light moves downward on the steps, as though returning, as though descending a path it once climbed. Locals observe this phenomenon quietly. Some place small offerings near the slabs on solstice morning. Flowers, stones, bits of woven fabric. These offerings blow away easily in the wind, leaving the slabs bare again. But the gesture remains, because the slabs feel like a place where something important once happened, or should have happened, or will happen again. During the dry season, when the air turns thin and clear, the slabs appear sharper. Their edges seem straighter, their surfaces seem smoother. The mountain shadows fall differently then, framing the slabs in a way that resembles a doorway. 3 steps leading to a threshold that no longer exists. Above the third slab, the sky seems larger than anywhere else along the ridge, as though it is waiting, as though it is listening, as though it is remembering. Wind behaves oddly near the slabs. It slows, it changes direction, it carries sound in unpredictable ways. One mountaineer reported hearing footsteps behind him when he stood on the second slab. When he turned, the ridge was empty. Another visitor said she heard the sound of stone scraping against stone, faint, rhythmic, distant, as though something heavy were being moved beneath the earth. No instrument has ever detected seismic activity here, but stories persist. A hiker who camped nearby said he woke in the night to find that the slabs glowed faintly under the moonlight. Not brightly, not in any supernatural way, but with the reflective sheen of quartz touched by cold light. He described the scene as the steps remembering daylight. If the slabs remember, they remember quietly, patiently, without explanation. The landscape around them changes constantly, seasons shifting, plants growing and dying, water carving new channels in the earth. But the slabs remain exactly where they have always been, resisting the pull of time. A beginning, a gesture, a question carved in stone. When you finally prepare to leave the slabs, stepping down from the topmost stone back onto the uneven ground, you may feel a strange reluctance, as though walking away from an unfinished sentence, as though stepping out of a story whose ending you will never hear. You turn to look back. The slabs lie silent, unmoved, unchanged, unexplained. A staircase of 3 perfect steps leading towards sky instead of land, rising not to a summit but to an absence, carved with intention but left without purpose. The stair that climbed, no mountain will remain where it stands. Beneath shifting clouds, beneath ancient winds, beneath a sky that holds its secrets tightly. A beginning without an end, a path without a destination, a quiet ascent into nothing, or into everything the mountains remember, but no longer reveal. The route that turned to stone. In the dry, wind-carved expanses of Patagonia, where the land stretches out in long waves of red earth and pale stone, there lies a quiet valley that almost never appears on maps. It is bordered by low basalt ridges, twisted by ancient volcanic forces, and its floor is strewn with fragments of old worlds, pieces of petrified wood, shards of mineral-rich soil, and the faint outlines of roots that fed trees long before humans walked these lands. Much of Patagonia feels ancient, but this valley feels older still, a place caught between the present and a memory so distant that time itself seems uncertain. In the center of this valley stands a single fossil column, tall, straight, rising from the earth like a monument no one remembers building. Locals call it the root that turned to stone. It is not a tree trunk, though at first glance it resembles one. Its surface holds the faintest suggestion of bark, lines and grooves worn smooth by eons of wind. But anyone who studies it closely sees the difference immediately. The grain spirals downward, not upward. It is not trunk wood. It is root wood, once buried beneath the soil, inverted now by geological upheaval. A root that once fed a tree taller than any still living in the region. A root preserved perfectly in stone. A root that stands upright today, pointing toward a sky it never touched. To reach it, you walk along a dusty trail marked only by the shifting prints of guanacos and the occasional plodding track of an old ranch truck. The wind pushes against you constantly, carrying with it the dry aroma of sun-baked earth. The valley unfolds gradually. First, a wide sweep of scrub and red soil, then the scattered remnants of fossil logs lying half embedded in the ground like ribs of forgotten beasts. And then you see the column. It rises nearly 3 meters into the air, its surface streaked with bands of mineral quartz and iron. At its base, the stone broadens slightly, the way roots flare when they meet the soil. Above, the column narrows as though reaching upward, unnaturally, impossibly, toward the light. The first impression is simple wonder. The second is a quiet, inexplicable unease, because roots are meant to anchor, not to rise, not to stand alone in empty valleys, not to remain long after the tree itself is gone. When you stand in front of the fossil root, you notice immediately how out of place it feels. Everything around it lies low to the ground. Scrub brush, broken stone, occasional fossil stumps tilted at odd angles. But the root stands straight, perfectly vertical, refusing to bow to wind or erosion. Its color shifts with the light. In morning sun, it glows tawny gold. At midday, it turns pale and nearly white. In late afternoon, shadows carve dark patterns along its grooves. And at dusk, the column becomes almost black, an upright silhouette against a sky of fading red. Researchers who have studied the fossil forest nearby can explain the geology with precision. Millions of years ago, a vast woodland grew here, fed by volcanic soil and warm climates now long gone. A sudden eruption buried the forest in ash, preserving the wood in perfect detail. Later, tectonic forces lifted and fractured the land, exposing some trunks and burying others. But even those researchers admit that the root stands differently from the others. Some say it was lifted vertically by fault movement. Some say erosion carved away the surrounding soil too evenly to be accidental. Some say the root was preserved in a pocket of sediment unusually resistant to time. But none of those explanations account for its posture. It stands like something placed, something chosen, something pointed, very intentionally, toward the open sky. Local herders speak of the column with quiet respect, not fear, never fear, but a kind of recognition. They say the root remembers a forest that breathed before mountains grew old. They say the wind changes its voice when passing the stone, softening as though to avoid disturbing something sleeping inside it. They say that animals, even wild ones, walk around the root rather than beside it. One herder told a story passed down through generations. According to the tale, long before the land dried and changed shape, a tree older than the valley stood here. It was the first to grow in the forest and the last to fall. When the eruption came and the ash began to bury the land, the tree resisted. Its trunk cracked and burned, but its roots refused to die. They drank the minerals of the earth until the entire root system turned to stone. But the root kept standing, the herder said, because the tree had not finished waiting. Waiting for what, he did not say. Another story claims the root is a marker, not placed, but chosen by the land itself, to remember a forest no longer standing. A memory captured in stone, rising alone in the valley, pointing upward not for light, but for recall. Scientists dismiss these stories kindly, but the root remains. Its grooves spiral downward, tracing thousands of years of growth. Fossilization preserved every curve, every knot, every subtle ridge. Touching its surface feels like touching wood, hardwood, impossibly hard, as though the tree still breathes beneath the stone. People who visit the root for the first time often stand in silence without realizing it. The valley is already quiet, but something about the fossil makes the silence deeper, denser, like a pause held too long. During certain seasons, particularly late winter when the sun is low, the root casts a long, narrow shadow across the valley floor. The shadow stretches toward a distant hill, pointing unfailingly in the same direction every year. Some have suggested that the shadow once aligned with the place where its parent tree stood. Others believe it points toward a natural spring now dried up by changes in climate. But most agree it feels intentional, a gesture trapped in stone. In spring, when rains briefly soften the valley, small flowers bloom at the base of the root, tiny yellow blossoms that grow nowhere else in the region. Their seeds cling to the fossilized stone, sheltered by its ridged surface. Locals call them memory flowers, believing they sprout from the last remnants of the ancient forest. In summer, when afternoon heat rises in shimmering waves, the root feels almost warm to the touch. Some say you can feel a faint vibration then, the quivering hum of heat passing through mineralized wood. Others claim it feels like a heartbeat, though only for a moment before it fades. In autumn, when winds return with strength, the air whistles faintly through a small natural hollow near the root's base. The sound is soft but unmistakable, like a flute carved by the earth itself. Travelers have described the tone as mournful, others as serene, and one archaeologist as the valley remembering how to sing. In winter, frost paints the root in delicate crystals. The fossil glows under moonlight, gleaming like polished silver. The valley becomes still then, so still that the silence feels almost physical. Coyotes and guanacos leave faint tracks in the snow, but none approach the root. It stands alone, a solitary column on a field of white, carrying the weight of seasons with slow, unbroken patience. The root's mineral structure reveals layers of ancient growth rings, frozen inside the stone like concentric memories. Some rings are thick, representing seasons of abundance. Others are thin, marking years when the forest struggled. But the last few rings, closest to the exterior, are unusually compressed, as though the tree endured something immense before turning to stone. Perhaps the eruption, perhaps the final days of the ancient forest, perhaps something else entirely. Geologists say the root had been dying before the fossilizing ash reached it, but the fossilized wood captures no decay, only completion. A root that fulfilled its purpose then opened itself to stone. The position of the column has long puzzled researchers. It leans ever so slightly, 5 degrees, toward the eastern rim of the valley. This tilt is consistent across measurements taken decades apart. No shifting of the land has altered its posture. Some believe it leaned this way before fossilization. Others think erosion carved the ground beneath it evenly. But a few, including a quiet paleobotanist who spent 3 seasons studying the fossil, believe the root was pulled upward slightly during the eruption, as though rising toward the falling ash, straining against burial, reaching for something above the earth. She wrote later in her notes, "It looks like a gesture, a final gesture, not upward toward survival, upward toward remembrance." People who camp in the valley sometimes report hearing faint sounds at night, soft clicks, low creaks, the whisper of something shifting. These noises could easily be temperature changes affecting rocks, but those who hear them insist they come from the fossil itself. One visitor, a photographer who spent several nights capturing the valley at dusk, wrote that he woke at midnight to the sound of wood cracking, loud, sharp, unmistakable. He rushed outside expecting to see a fallen tree or split beam from his shelter, but nothing had changed. The valley was silent. The root stood exactly as it always had. He left the valley at sunrise and did not return. During the driest part of the year, dust storms move through the region, lifting fine particles into the air. When the storms pass, they leave ripples in the soil that resemble waves frozen mid-motion. Strangely, the soil around the root maintains perfect stillness during these storms. Wind sweeps past it, scouring the land, yet the base of the fossil remains untouched. Smooth ground, undisturbed earth. A geologist once suggested an aerodynamic explanation. Locals simply said, it remembers where it stood before. The root may not stand exactly where the ancient tree grew. Earthquakes and time have shifted much of Patagonia's landscape, but many believe the valley is roughly the same, shaped not by coincidence but by memory built into stone and earth. If the valley remembers, it remembers quietly. Some hikers say the root has an air of unfinished business, as though it was left behind to mark a place where something once thrived, as though it anchors the valley in the memory of the forest, as though it waits for someone or something to return, for an age that will never return, for a tree that will not grow again, for footsteps long vanished. Some describe the root as sad. Others describe it as peaceful. All describe it as alive in ways stone should not be. When you place your hand on the fossil, you feel its temperature shift slightly. whether from the sun, the wind, or some deeper cause is impossible to tell. But the stone feels responsive in a way that defies simple explanation. It feels aware, not conscious, not thinking, but aware of being touched, aware of being seen, aware of being remembered. In late afternoon, shadows from distant ridges creep slowly toward the root. When the shadows finally touch its surface, the fossil seems to hum with coolness. The valley dims, the wind softens, birds fall silent, and for a moment, the root looks less like stone and more like wood. Wood that might creak again, wood that might move once more, wood that might rise upward toward a sky no longer filled with ash. But the moment passes, the root becomes stone again, still, silent, patient. When you finally leave the valley, walking away from the fossil column, the wind picks up behind you. Your footsteps fade into dust and grass. The sky over the Andes glows faintly gold. And when you turn for one final look, the root stands exactly as it did when you arrived, unmoving, unchanging, steady. It rises from the earth like a memory refusing to fade, a fossil that remembers its tree, a stone that remembers its root, a root that remembers the forest, a forest that remembers the world before time began to erase. The root that turned to stone will remain where it stands, through storms, through centuries, through forgotten epochs, pointing upward toward the sky it never touched, waiting for a forest that will never return, carrying a memory too old to understand. The stone that remembered the waters, high in the Peruvian highlands, where the mountains rise like ancient guardians and the air grows thin with altitude and memory. There lies a plateau that once held ceremonies older than the stories passed down to us. Below it, terraces cling to the slopes like folded layers of time. Above it, the sky stretches in a wide, pale vault, where clouds drift slowly as though waiting for meaning to gather beneath them. In this landscape, carved from volcanic stone, rests a monolith unlike any other. A stone covered in channels, basins, terraces, and miniature pathways that seem too deliberate to be natural. A stone shaped with purpose, even if that purpose has long since vanished. A stone that once felt the movement of water across its surface like a living skin. Locals call it the stone that remembered the waters. At first glance, it resembles a massive boulder, irregular in form, weathered by centuries of rain, and split by faint cracks that trace its edges. But when you draw closer, the carvings reveal themselves. An intricate network of miniature canals, stair-like patterns, reservoirs, and depressions, etched into its upper surface with a precision that defies simple explanation. It looks like a map, a topographical dream of rivers and terraces. It looks like a model, a landscape reduced and studied. It looks like a memory, a stone holding the knowledge of water long gone. No two observers describe the stone the same way. Some see a model of agricultural terraces. Some see a hydraulic experiment or ritual teaching stone. Some see a sacred landscape symbol. Others see nothing but abstract shapes. But everyone who stands before it feels something else, a sense that the stone holds knowledge not fully visible to the eye. The Sahuite stone rests in an open clearing surrounded by low grass and the remnants of Inca-era foundations. The land around it is quiet, with a stillness that belongs more to places where people once communicated with the sky than to ordinary ground. The wind moves gently, carrying the scent of stone warmed by sunlight. Birds perch on distant rocks, but rarely land on the monolith. When you approach it for the first time, the carvings seem chaotic. Lines and curves intersecting in patterns that feel beyond immediate comprehension. But as your eyes adjust, order begins to form from the confusion. Tiny channels spiral downward. Terraced shapes resemble the agricultural fields that cling to Andean mountainsides. Pools appear connected by narrow passageways designed to guide flowing water. Some depressions look like reservoirs. Others look like miniature courtyards. One looks unmistakably like a representation of a stepped platform. And all of it feels alive when rain falls upon it. During storms, rare but powerful in this region, water flows down the stone in small torrents, filling basins, connecting pathways, and revealing the purpose behind its design. The channels activate, the terraces overflow in sequence. The patterns respond instantaneously, as though the stone remembers exactly how water is supposed to move. Observers describe the effect as mesmerizing. The stone seems to awaken. It seems to breathe. It seems to recall a time when water flowed across its carved surface during rituals, lessons, or offerings. One archaeologist who studied the stone during a storm wrote, "It was like watching an ancient mind think. The stone's carvings number in the hundreds. Miniature animals, geometric depressions, symbolic terraces, holes drilled with precision, channels that meander like rivers under the sun, and great, sweeping curves that seem to tell stories in shapes rather than words. Some shapes represent pumas, frogs, lizards, animals associated with water in Andean cosmology. Others resemble mountains, valleys, and pathways. Still others defy classification entirely, as though they represent rituals lost to time or landscapes never meant to be recorded in writing. What is most unusual is not the presence of symbols, but their placement. They are arranged as though the stone is not simply carved, but composed. Every line has direction. Every depression has purpose. Every channel has flow. Every symbol looks placed exactly where it needed to be for the whole to function. Even now, after centuries of erosion, the relationships between the carvings remain visible. Some researchers argue that the stone is a hydraulic model, a teaching tool used to train engineers or priests in the movement of water through terraces, canals, and agricultural systems. The Inca were master engineers, able to control water with astonishing precision. This stone, they say, was a scale model for that genius. Others believe the stone served a ritual purpose used in ceremonies that honored the spirits of water, mountains, and sky. In these traditions, water was not simply a resource, but a sacred being. To guide water was to speak to the mountains. To channel water was to communicate with the sun. But the oldest explanation, the one whispered by descendants of the highland communities, is simpler, quieter, more poetic. They say the stone remembers. They say it holds the memory of lost rivers. They say it keeps the pattern of how rain once moved across the land. They say it listens when the skies darken. They say it sings when water returns. When water touches it, one elder said, the stone knows what to do. The Sayhuite stone is not small. It weighs dozens of tons. It sits firmly in place, partially embedded in the earth. It has remained upright through earthquakes, storms, and seasons of drought. It feels permanent, and yet its carvings create the impression of motion, a frozen flow, a landscape halted mid-breath, a model of movement in a material that cannot move. Standing beside it, you find your gaze tracing the channels, following their twists and turns, learning their logic in a way that feels instinctive. The water pathways lead, your eyes as though guiding your thoughts, down the central channel, into a basin shaped like a small lake, over a tiny lip that resembles a spillway, through a meandering river form, toward a carved depression shaped like a valley, back upward to a raised platform. It feels like walking through a landscape without leaving your place. It feels like following the memory of water through stone. In morning light, the carvings appear shallow. At midday, their shadows deepen, creating stark contrasts. By late afternoon, the entire stone looks like a miniature world, lit in gold, with its channels glowing faintly. At night, under moonlight, the stone takes on a quieter presence. The channels appear as pale pathways, the basins as dark circles. The carvings blend into a single, unified surface, silent, waiting. Some travelers describe hearing faint water sounds when standing near the stone during dry months. Not real water, not anything measurable or recorded, but an echo of movement, a suggestion of flow, a whisper of memory too old to decipher. A researcher once placed a sensitive audio device near one of the deepest channels. He detected low-frequency vibrations, consistent, rhythmic, subtle. He attributed them to distant ground movement or wind resonance. But the pattern did not match typical environmental noise. It matched flow, water flow, movement where no water moved. He never published the finding. The stone's most mysterious feature is a large depression near its center, almost bowl-like, deep enough to collect water even during light rain. Whatever fills this basin drains slowly into smaller channels that weave outward like veins. Some say this basin represents a sacred spring. Others believe it symbolizes the origin of all water in the region. One archaeologist noted that the basin aligns with the sunrise on equinox mornings, a coincidence, or perhaps something more. When rainstorms sweep across the highlands, and they do so unpredictably, the stone becomes animated. Observers describe it as a transformation. Water races into channels. Small streams form instantly. Basins fill. Terraces overflow in sequence. Shapes darken under the sheen of moisture, and the entire stone appears to glow. It looks alive, and those who witness it rarely forget the experience. One local man said he watched the stone wake up during a storm when he was a child. He remembered the water turning the carvings into small rivers, remembered how the channels seemed to pull the rain toward them, remembered how the stone sang softly under the falling water. It was as if it remembered the rain, he said. Not just accepted it, greeted it. During periods of drought, the stone cracks slightly but remains whole. Its carvings appear sharper, as though the absence of water reveals details normally hidden. Tiny grooves become visible. New relationships between symbols appear. The stone seems to grow older and younger at the same time. Older because dryness highlights every fracture. Younger because its carvings reveal themselves with new clarity. Some visitors say the stone feels warmer during dry seasons. Others say it feels cooler. No measurement confirms either sensation, but the stone feels different in the absence of water. More expectant, more awake, more like a memory waiting to be touched again. Nearby ruins hint at structures that once surrounded the stone, a plaza perhaps, or a ceremonial platform. Walls lie collapsed, their foundations half buried. Steps carved into natural rock lead nowhere. Empty terraces cling to hillside contours. The stone appears to be the last intact remnant of a complex whose purpose we no longer understand. The monolith sits exactly where it needs to, not in the center, not on the highest ground, but at a point where water naturally pools during rain. This suggests intention, placement, purpose, a water stone placed where water chooses to gather. It is easy to imagine ancient priests standing around it, pouring water, observing its pathways, learning from its language, listening to the stone's response. Rain was not simply weather in this world. Rain was communication. Rain was a voice. Rain was a ceremony. And the stone was a listener. Time has softened much of the carving detail, but in some places the symbols remain crisp. Tiny frogs carved into the stone's surface appear mid-leap. Channels resembling serpent forms wind between terraces. A carved feline shape, possibly a puma, rests near the edge, overseeing the flow paths like a guardian spirit. The stone is a cosmology, a landscape, a memory, a question carved into the earth. And yet, for all its carvings, the stone speaks most loudly through its silence. When no rain falls, when the sky is clear and the wind still, the stone looks dormant. But when you place your hand on it, you may feel a faint texture, like the grain of wood, though it is stone, or like the bones of a forgotten river system pressed into solid form. Visitors have described a range of sensations when touching the stone: warmth, coolness, a faint tingling, a quiet hum, nothing at all. Each experience is different. Each experience is true. Some say the stone speaks only when it wants to. The oldest local stories, those rarely written down, claim the stone holds the memory of a world where water once flowed more freely, a world where mountains were younger, a world where rivers wandered paths now lost to time. One saying, passed between families, goes, "The stone remembers for us." The stone does not simply depict water. It reflects relationship between land and sky, between humans and rain, between mountains and flow. And yet, the stone's greatest mystery remains unsolved. Why was it carved? What was its final purpose? Why was it left behind when everything else disappeared? No writing exists to explain its function. No tablet, no record, no inscription. Only the stone remains, quiet, patient, watching the sky for signs of rain, When you finally turn to leave the monolith, walking the narrow path back toward the edge of the ruined complex, the air seems to shift. The mountains look larger. The valley feels deeper. The sky feels older. And if you turn for one last glance, the stone appears different, stronger, more deliberate, more like a living memory carved into permanence. The channels still wind across its surface. The basins still wait for water. The symbols still guard their meanings. The stone still holds its silence. A stone that once knew the language of water. A stone that remembers every drop. A stone that continues to wait for the rains that shaped it. The stone that remembered the waters endures. Unchanged, unanswered, unforgotten, waiting for the sky to speak again. The finger that held the sky. In the quiet reaches of Namibia's desert, where the land stretches out in vast plains of sand and stone, there once stood a pillar that seemed almost too delicate to survive the weight of centuries. The desert around it was shaped by winds that had blown unchanged for longer than human memory, and the sky above it opened into an endless blue expanse, so wide that the horizon appeared curved by distance alone. Out in this open silence, where shadows slid across rock like drifting memories, the pillar rose from the earth like a single finger pointing toward the heavens. People called it Mukurub, the finger of God. From afar, it appeared impossibly thin, an elegant spire of sandstone balanced on a narrow base that seemed far too small to support the weight of the formation above. It towered over the surrounding landscape, defying gravity with an ease that made it look as though it had not grown from the ground, but instead had been placed there intentionally, like a gesture frozen in stone. Even before you reached it, Mukurub drew the eye. Its shape was unmistakable, a tall, elongated column tapering upward, ending in an overhanging block that looked like a suspended fingertip. The desert around it felt wider and quieter as you approached, as if the landscape itself respected the stone's improbable presence. Though the formation collapsed in 1988, its memory still stands as clearly as if the stone had never fallen. People who saw Mukurub before its collapse describe it as a miracle of balance. People who never saw it feel its absence as if it had been a monument to something older than stone itself. But before it fell, before the desert reclaimed what it had once lifted, Mukurub stood for countless years in silence, a finger holding up the sky. To walk toward the pillar was to step into a deeper stillness. The desert grew quieter. The wind softened. The sunlight sharpened the shadows cast by the formation until it appeared to stand upon pure darkness. Even the sands seemed to settle as though listening. The closer you came, the more impossible the balance looked. The base was narrow. So narrow it appeared carved, sculpted, refined by some unseen hand. The upper portion, massive and asymmetrical, looked as though a single heavy breath might topple it. Yet it stood proudly, confidently, as though perfectly aware of its own stability. Some called it a natural wonder. Others called it a sign. All agreed it did not look like something the earth should have allowed. Standing beneath it, you felt the sky expand. Not overhead, but outward, around you, like a dome supporting itself against the desert floor. Mukurub seemed less like a pillar rising from the earth, and more like an anchor holding the heavens in place. Legends grew around it, as they always do around impossible things. Local Nama stories spoke of a time when the stone was not stone at all, but the uplifted finger of a giant who protected the land. When danger passed, the giant turned to dust, but his finger remained as a reminder. Others said the pillar marked a place where the sky once touched the earth, and the stone rose from that touch like a memory of the moment the world changed. Still others believed Mukurub was a boundary marker, not for people, but for the winds themselves, a point where storms paused before crossing the desert, as if awaiting permission from the stone. Scientists studying the formation focused on erosion, sandstorms carving the base, ancient waters smoothing the upper rock. They photographed its fractures, measured its center of gravity, and debated how something so top-heavy could remain standing for millennia. Yet, even those scientists admitted something unexplainable lingered around it. One geologist wrote, "It feels wrong to look at it scientifically. It looks like an idea, not a rock." When rain fell, which was rare in this region, the pillar darkened, becoming a deep shade of amber. The wet sandstone glimmered briefly, turning the finger into a towering silhouette of liquid gold. After the rain evaporated, The stone paled again, returning to his usual dusty beige. The desert hardened at its feet, and the ground cracked in thin lines that radiated from the base like spokes of an ancient wheel. At sunrise, the stone caught the first light, glowing softly along its edges. At noon, its shadow shrank to a small pool of darkness. At sunset, the shadow stretched long across the desert floor, forming a dark blade that pointed toward distant hills. Night brought a different kind of presence. Under the stars, Mukurab looked like a guardian watching the sky, its outline cut sharply against the Milky Way. Sometimes, when wind carried fine grains of sand across its surface, the pillar emitted faint sounds, whispers, sighs, and soft tones that traveled across the quiet desert. Travelers camping nearby often described waking at night to the sense that the stone was listening. One man recalled hearing low humming, not from the wind or the air, but from the stone itself. He felt it through the ground, vibrating gently beneath his sleeping mat. When he stepped outside, the desert was silent. The pillar stood unmoving. The humming stopped. Another traveler reported seeing light reflected strangely on its upper edge, as though the stone were illuminated from within by some faint, pulsing glow. He knew it must have been starlight or moonlight, refracting off the sandstone's minerals. And yet he felt uneasy, as though Mukurab were more awake than the desert itself. Animals avoided its base. Birds rarely perched on it. Footprints of jackals, springbok, and desert foxes circled at a distance, but none came close. Some believed the stone emitted a low-frequency vibration that animals could sense. Others believed animals recognized danger in its balance. A few whispered that the stone's shadow held something sacred. The desert around Mukurab changed constantly. Dunes shifted. Grass patches died and regrew. Storm winds carved new ridges overnight. Occasional rains brought temporary life, but the finger remained unchanged. It held its impossible balance. It held its improbable grace. It held its silent command over the horizon. If you climbed the small hill beside it, something many travelers did, you could stand level with the upper portion of the stone and gaze directly at the desert beyond. From that vantage, the pillar looked even stranger. An angled block of stone resting atop a column so fragile that time itself seemed to tiptoe around it. The stone's underside revealed small cavities carved by erosion, tiny alcoves, thin arches, delicate layers only a few centimeters thick. The entire formation looked as though it should collapse at any moment, and yet it stood. For centuries it stood, holding up a piece of the sky. Locals believed that a prophecy was tied to its fall, that when Mukurab finally collapsed, something significant would shift in the land. Some linked the prophecy to politics, others to drought, others to the movements of people. Still others claimed the stone's fall would signal the end of an age. But prophecies do not prevent gravity, nor do beliefs halt the slow erosion of sandstone. On a night in December 1988, after standing for countless ages, Mukurab collapsed. There was no storm, no earthquake, no wind strong enough to blame. Sometime between evening and dawn, the finger of God finally gave way. Its base cracked, its improbable balance tilted, and the stone fell onto the desert floor in a silent gesture that no one witnessed. In the morning, travelers found the formation broken, not shattered, just resting on the ground, its long-standing defiance over. People reacted as though a living being had died. Some cried, some stood in silence, some touched the fallen stone with reverence, some took small fragments as keepsakes, some said the sky looked emptier. The desert felt different afterward, not wounded, just changed, as though a chapter had ended with the collapse of something ancient and improbable. Today, only a small stump remains where the base once stood. The upper portion lies in pieces, its delicate overhang broken by the fall. The desert has begun to reclaim the fragments, burying them in sand and time. But Mukurab has not vanished. It lingers in memory, in photographs, in stories, in silence, and in the feeling that somewhere, somehow, something once touched the sky from the desert floor. People who visit the site now say the silence feels heavier, as though the desert still remembers the stone that held up the heavens, as though the air feels the absence of its gesture, as though the sky has not forgotten what once pushed against it. Even in its absence, Mukurub remains a presence, a memory of impossible balance, a reminder of time's quiet power, a symbol of defiance written in stone against the desert's patient erosion. Some say the finger still exists, as an echo, a shadow, a story the land repeats when the wind is right. Some say its fall released something long held in place. Others say it simply returned to the earth that carved it. But everyone agrees on one thing. The sky looks different without the finger that once held it, and the desert, vast and unending, still carries the shape of its absence. A horizon that once had a lone, impossible pillar now stretches unbroken. Yet if you stand in that desert, alone with the wind, with sand shifting at your feet, and with the sky towering above you, you might still feel it. A presence leaning upward, a memory rising from the ground, a stone that once defied gravity and touched the heavens. The finger that held the sky may no longer stand, but its story stands taller than the stone ever did. A testament to mystery, to balance, to silence, and to the way the earth remembers even what it loses. Thank you for wandering with us through these silent stones and the mysteries they still hold. If you enjoyed this journey, please like, subscribe, and share where you're watching from. Until our next unearthed secret, sleep well, and may the forgotten places stay gentle in your dreams.